Hey folks, it's shawnebaby. Welcome to episode 5 of my career playthrough in Kerbal Space Program. In this episode, my main objective is to rescue a Kerbal from low Kerbin orbit. Before we get to building, let's head over to Mission Control to pick up a contract for that now. There we are. Looks like we have a contract to rescue Kerbin, so let's go ahead and pick this contract up. Now that we've got the contract, his ship should appear in the tracking center. Let's take a look to see what kind of orbit he's in. And there he is. Lucky for us, it looks like he's in a fairly equatorial orbit, so it should be pretty easy to line up our inclination. Looks like his orbit isn't completely circular, but his apoapsis is under 90K, so it shouldn't take us too much fuel to rendezvous with him. Now that we've got a sense for his orbit, let's head over to the VAB and start building. So instead of starting from scratch, I'm going to load a ship we've previously saved and achieved orbit with. There's no need for these science instruments since we've already gathered science from space around Kerbin. Since we'll be rescuing Kerbin, we'll need some more crew capacity to bring him home. This Mark I crew cabin should do the trick. We'll need to do lots of maneuvering with our reaction wheels, and since our Terrier engine does not generate electricity, let's add some solar panels to ensure we don't run out. And with the added weight of our crew cabin, let's add some more parachutes to make sure we safely land. The crew cabin doesn't have a high heat tolerance, so to make sure our heat shield stays at the bottom during re-entry, I'm going to make sure our center of mass is more towards the bottom of the ship. Lastly, let's add some more fuel to our upper and lower stage to make sure we have more than enough fuel for our rescue mission. And that should do it. Let's save this as a new ship in case we need to do some more rescue missions. I'll call it the Low Kerbin Orbit Rescuer. And before we launch, let's check to make sure we'll actually have room in our ship since pilots are auto-assigned to the vessel. And it looks like we should be good. So, let's do this. Before we launch, let's try to line up our encounter with Kerbin as close as possible. That way we can avoid unnecessary course corrections later. From past experience, for an orbit this low, I found it's best to launch when our target is around 300K from us. Okay, the next step is to go into orbit just like you normally would. We'll adjust our orbits depending on whether we end up in front of or behind our target. If we're behind, we'll want a smaller orbit than our target so that we can catch up with them. But if we're in front, then we'll want a larger orbit than our target so they can catch up with us. We'll know either way once we achieve orbit. It's a good idea to check on your inclination relative to the target and make corrections as necessary. Looks like I'm just a little bit off, so some very minor adjustments are needed. With this ship, I want to make sure to reach space with our first stage, since our upper stage has a Terrier engine, which performs best in space. Since we're getting close to our target, our speed has switched to target mode. But we're not ready to match speeds just yet, so I'm going to toggle it back over to orbit. If you can't tell, we're the ship in front and Kerbin is the one behind us. As our orbits get near each other, we'll start to see intersect markers for our closest approach. It's a good sign that we're seeing them before we've hit orbital speed. It means we should be pretty close once we hit orbit. You're almost never going to get a perfect encounter, so at some point you do need to reach orbit and then make course corrections from there. Now that we're in orbit, I'm going to try to make fine adjustments until we have an encounter at least under 10K. I'm using very low thrust burns to fine-tune my encounter. Looks like we got a milestone for our first rendezvous. Sweet! And with a little luck, I've managed to get an encounter of 3.7K. Oh, Looks like we're even closer now than we would be after our next encounter. Now it's time to switch our speed over to target mode and begin our approach. Start off by burning towards your target until you reach a speed of around 50 meters per second. Here I'm going to start aiming up to pull our prograde marker towards the target. Alright, now that we're headed for Harbin, let's switch to retrograde to prepare to slow down once we get near. Once I get close to Harbin, I'm going to start burning retrograde until my speed is almost 0. In target mode, the speed is yours relative to the target, so if we hit 0, we should be going at about the same speed. That should be close enough. I'm going to switch the lights on in my crew cabin so it's easier for him to see us in the dark. And now, I simply switch control over to Harbin with the bracket key and spacewalk my way over to the rescue ship. One perk of rescuing Kerbins from orbit is they get added to your crew once you rescue them. Spacewalking is a lot harder than it may look, especially in the dark. Alright, now that we're latched on, I'm going to transfer Jeb to the crew cabin so that Harbin can get in. And then I'll do a little switcheroo so Jeb can finish piloting us the way home. Looks like we got a couple more milestones here. Okay, now all that's left to do is to deorbit and return to the surface. Make sure you don't forget to set your speed to orbit mode before burning retrograde. To make sure we don't burn up in the atmosphere during re-entry, I'm going to set my periapsis to just under 50k, so we've got plenty of time to slow down. Now that we're heating up, I'm going to burn our excess fuel and ditch this extra weight. And that does it. We've successfully rescued Harbin and returned him to KSC. Let's check him out in the astronaut complex and see what profession he has. Oh, looks like he's a scientist. Cool. Well, that does it for this episode. In my next one, I plan to build a manned Minmus lander capable of biome hopping and returning home. Hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching.